The stars had never seemed so far away as they did now through the thick metal bars of the holding cell. Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the cold surface, watching alien ships move like glowing insects in the darkness outside. 3 weeks ago, she had been exploring the Outer Rim territories with her crew of 47 humans aboard the exploration vessel Defiance. Now she was a prisoner of something calling itself the Zephyrian Empire. The cell was designed for creatures much larger than humans. Elena could walk 15 steps in any direction before hitting a wall. The ceiling stretched high above her head, and the door was a massive slab of metal that would take a tank to move. Everything about this place was built to make prisoners feel small and helpless. Elena was neither. She had been studying their captors for 3 weeks now. The Zephyrians were tall, thin creatures with 4 arms and skin that changed color based on their mood. They wore flowing robes and spoke in musical tones that their translation devices turned into flat, emotionless words. They treated humans the way someone might treat a new type of insect they had found in their garden. The worst part was not the imprisonment. It was the casual way the Zephyrians dismissed them. Elena had tried to explain that humans came from Earth, that they had built cities and traveled between stars. The Zephyrian officer had simply nodded and made a note on his data pad. Another primitive species discovered, another entry in their vast catalog of lesser beings. Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's scientist, sat on the metal bench that served as furniture. She had been writing notes on a piece of fabric torn from her uniform. The Zephyrians had taken all their electronic devices, but they had not thought to take away human curiosity. "I've been watching the guard patterns," Sarah said quietly. "They change shifts every 6 hours. The new guards always stop at the observation deck first. That gives us maybe 2 minutes when no one is watching this corridor." Elena nodded. Sarah was small and quiet, but she had a mind like a steel trap. She missed nothing.
"What about the other prisoners?"
Elena asked. Through the walls they could hear sounds from other cells. Clicking noises, low moaning sounds, something that might have been singing in a language no human throat could make. The Zephyrians kept different species separated. Elena suspected it was to prevent any kind of organized resistance. The cell to our left has those creatures with the 6 legs, the ones that look like giant spiders. The cell to our right is empty, but I heard movement there yesterday. Something new was brought in, Sarah said. Elena walked to the door and pressed her ear against it. The metal was thick, but she could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps moving with purpose. The door suddenly opened with a grinding sound that made Elena's teeth hurt. A Zephyrian guard entered, followed by another creature Elena had never seen before. This new alien was shorter than the Zephyrians, but broader. Its skin was covered in what looked like scales, and it had 4 eyes arranged around its head. "You will come with us," the Zephyrian said in its flat, translated voice. Elena and Sarah looked at each other. They had learned that arguing with the guards was useless. The Zephyrians had weapons that could paralyze a person without leaving any visible damage. Elena had tested this once in the first week, and had spent 6 hours unable to move while remaining fully aware of everything around her. They followed the guards down a long corridor lined with cell doors. Elena tried to count them as they walked. 50 doors on each side, maybe more. How many different species were imprisoned here? How long had the Empire been collecting civilizations like specimens in a zoo? The corridor opened into a vast chamber that took Elena's breath away. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them, and the walls curved away until they were lost in shadows. Floating platforms moved through the air carrying Zephyrians and other aliens. The sound of 1,000 different voices speaking in 1,000 different languages filled the air. They were led to a smaller room where a Zephyrian in more elaborate robes waited behind a desk made of something that looked like crystal. The alien's skin was a deep blue color, which Elena had learned meant it was either angry or concentrated. "I am Administrator Velthok," the creature said. "I have been reviewing your species file. You are to be assigned to work details appropriate to your physical capabilities and intelligence level." Elena stepped forward. "We need to talk about our release. My government will be looking for us. When they find us, they will want to negotiate." Administrator Velthok's skin shifted to a lighter blue. Elena had seen this color before. It meant amusement. "Your species has no government that extends beyond your single planet. You have no fleet capable of reaching this sector. You have no allies who know of your existence. You have nothing to negotiate with," the administrator said. The casual dismissal in those words hit Elena like a physical blow. Everything the administrator had said was true. Humanity had exactly 7 ships capable of interstellar travel, and all of them were exploration vessels. Earth's population was focused on rebuilding after the climate wars of the previous century. They had no idea that their newest ship was now in the hands of an empire that spanned galaxies. However, the administrator continued, your species shows promise as workers. Your hands are well designed for manipulation of small objects. Your endurance levels are adequate. You will be assigned to Mining Colony Tertius 7. Sarah spoke for the first time since entering the room. What happened to the other species you've collected? Where do they go after the work assignments? The administrator's skin shifted to a darker shade. Elena guessed this meant impatience. Some adapt and become useful contributors to the Empire. Others do not adapt well to their new circumstances. The Empire is efficient in its management of resources. The words were spoken in the same flat tone, but the meaning was clear. Species that could not be useful were disposed of. They were led back to their cell, but Elena's mind was racing. The Zephyrians saw humans as just another primitive species to be cataloged and used. They had no idea what humans were truly capable of when pushed into a corner. That night, Elena lay on the metal floor and stared at the ceiling. Earth was a hard world. Humans had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that had driven countless other species to extinction. They had turned a planet trying to kill them into a garden through sheer bloody-minded determination. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with another collection of simple creatures who would break under pressure. They were about to learn why humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple refusal to give up when things got difficult. Elena smiled in the darkness. The Empire had made a fundamental error. They had assumed that being technologically advanced meant being superior in every way that mattered. They were about to discover that sometimes the species that had to fight for everything they ever achieved were the most dangerous enemies of all. The mining colony assignment would give them access to equipment, other species, and most importantly, time to show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped pretending to be harmless. The transport ship that carried them to Mining Colony Tertius 7 was designed to move cargo, not passengers. Elena and her crew spent 5 days in a compartment barely large enough for 20 people, sharing the space with aliens from a dozen different worlds. The smell was something she would remember for the rest of her life. But humans adapt. By the second day, Elena had organized a system for sharing the limited air circulation. By the third day, Dr. Kim had figured out which of the alien food packets were safe for human consumption. By the 5th day, they had taught basic hand signals to 3 different species and learned the warning calls that meant the guards were coming. When the transport finally docked at Tertius 7, Elena got her first look at what the Empire considered a standard mining operation. The colony was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid the size of a small moon. Massive machines carved tunnels through solid rock, following veins of rare metals that would be shipped across the galaxy to fuel the Empire's endless expansion. The colony administrator was a Zephyrian named Curzon, who had the tired look of someone who had been doing the same job for far too long. He spoke to the new arrivals through a translation device that made his voice sound even more bored than usual. You will be assigned to work teams based on your physical capabilities. Work shifts are 12 hours. Food and rest periods are provided at scheduled intervals. Failure to meet production quotas results in reduced rations. Repeated failures result in reassignment to processing duties. Elena noticed that none of the other prisoners asked what processing duties meant. She suspected they already knew. The humans were assigned to Deep Tunnel 7, working with mining equipment that was older than human civilization. The machines were massive and crude, designed for species with thick hides and multiple arms. For humans, operating them was like trying to perform surgery with hammers. That lasted exactly 1 day. Chief Engineer Marcus Torres had served on mining platforms in the asteroid belt around Earth. He took one look at the Empire's equipment and started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that meant something was funny. The kind that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. This is junk, Marcus told Elena as they stood in front of a drilling rig that was bigger than their entire ship had been. Look at this power coupling. They're losing 60% efficiency through heat waste. And this control system is so basic my grandmother could have designed something better with spare parts from her kitchen. Elena looked around the tunnel. Dozens of aliens worked the mining equipment with the mechanical movements of people who had given up hope. The guards stayed near the tunnel entrance, keeping watch but staying far enough away to avoid the noise and dust of the actual mining. "How long would it take you to fix it?" she asked. Marcus grinned. It was not a nice expression. "Fix it? Lady, give me a week and I'll make this bucket of bolts sing opera while it digs holes to the center of the universe." Elena made her decision. Do it, but make it look like an accident. The next morning, Deep Tunnel 7's mining rig started working at twice its normal efficiency. The tunnel administrator, a four-armed creature called a Vorthak, was pleased but not particularly surprised. Sometimes the old equipment had good days. The morning after that, the rig was working at 3 times normal efficiency and producing ore so pure it didn't need processing. The administrator was very pleased and sent a positive report to Colony Command. By the end of the week, Deep Tunnel 7 was producing more refined metals than the rest of the mining complex combined. The humans working there had somehow convinced the equipment to work better than it had in decades. Colony Command was extremely pleased and ordered the humans to share their techniques with other work crews. What Colony Command didn't know was that Marcus had been very busy during the night shifts. The improvements to the mining equipment were just the obvious part of what he had been doing. Hidden inside the improved power systems were communication devices built from spare parts and mining tools that had been modified in ways that would not be obvious unless someone knew exactly what to look for. Dr. Kim had been busy too. She had been studying the other prisoners, learning about their homeworlds and their capabilities. She discovered that the 6-legged creatures from the cell next to theirs were natural engineers who had built cities under the ice on their frozen planet. The scaled creatures with 4 eyes were mathematicians who could calculate mining trajectories in their heads better than the Empire's computers. The reptilian species from the Outer Rim had been warriors before their capture. They knew tactics and strategy. The tall, thin creatures with the musical voices were chemists who could identify metal compositions by smell. Elena began to see the shape of something that might have been hope. The Empire's great strength was also its great weakness. They collected species from across the galaxy, but they never thought to let those species work together. Each group was kept separate, assigned to tasks based on the Empire's assumptions about their capabilities, and expected to work until they died or became too weak to be useful. But humans had always been different. On Earth, they had survived. Not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by working together and using tools. They had turned cooperation into an art form and problem-solving into a science. Elena started spending her rest periods in the common areas, talking to prisoners from other species. The guards allowed this because they assumed the language barriers made real communication impossible. They were right, mostly. But they had never seen humans learn. Within 2 weeks, Elena could communicate basic concepts with 12 different species. Within a month, she had learned enough about each group's capabilities to start thinking in terms of a larger plan. Marcus had been teaching the Vorthak engineers human techniques for equipment modification. The 6-legged ice creatures were showing other species how to reinforce tunnel walls to prevent cave-ins. Dr. Kim was working with the reptilian chemists to identify which tunnel systems might be expanded without detection. The mining colony's efficiency kept improving. Production reports to the Empire showed steady increases that made the administrators very happy. What the reports didn't show was that the improvements were being made by a growing network of prisoners who were learning to trust each other. The Empire had spent thousands of years collecting the galaxy's most intelligent and capable species. They had brought them all together in one place and given them access to industrial equipment and unlimited time to work. They had created exactly the kind of situation that humans had always been best at turning to their advantage. Elena stood in Deep Tunnel 7, watching Marcus explain something to a group of alien engineers using hand gestures and sketches scratched into the tunnel wall. Around them, mining equipment that had been obsolete for centuries hummed with new efficiency, producing not just the metals the Empire wanted, but also components for devices that the Empire would never think to look for. The administrators thought they were watching their most successful mining operation. What they were actually watching was humanity doing what it had always done best, taking a bad situation and making it work for them anyway. The Empire was about to learn that there was a very big difference between being primitive and being harmless. The children were small, even by the standards of their own species. They looked like miniature versions of the tall, musical creatures Elena had been learning to communicate with. 6 of them, huddled together in the center of the colony's main assembly area, while Administrator Curzon spoke to the gathered prisoners. Production in Tunnel Complex 12 has fallen below acceptable levels for 3 consecutive periods, the Zephyrian announced through his translation device. This is unacceptable. The Empire requires efficiency from all workers. Those who cannot contribute will be processed. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had heard whispers about processing from the longer-term prisoners. It was what happened when the Empire decided a species was no longer useful. The 6 small creatures pressed closer together. They were singing something in their musical language, a sound so beautiful it made Elena's throat tight. Even the translation device could not strip all the emotion from it. It sounded like a lullaby. "No," Elena said, stepping forward from the crowd. "They're just children. They can't work the heavy equipment. Give them lighter duties." Administrator Curzon's skin shifted to the dark color that meant annoyance. The Empire does not maintain non-productive resources. These specimens have failed to meet minimum contribution standards. Around the assembly area, Elena could see the faces of prisoners from a dozen different species. Some looked away. Others watched with the dead eyes of people who had seen this too many times before. But she could also see anger. Carefully hidden, but there. The Empire had made these prisoners watch their friends and family members disappear one by one. They had learned not to fight back because fighting back meant joining the next group selected for processing. But the anger was still there, buried under layers of fear and hopelessness. "I'll take their quota," Elena said. "My crew will make up the difference." The administrator's skin shifted to the light color that meant amusement. "Your species has already exceeded production expectations by significant margins. Adding additional quotas would reduce your efficiency. This is not acceptable." Elena felt the last of her patience disappear. She had spent months watching the Empire treat intelligent beings like spare parts in a machine. She had kept quiet and played along because she needed time to plan and organize. But there were some lines that could not be crossed. "Then you have a problem," she said. The administrator's skin color deepened. "Explain." Elena looked around the assembly area. Hundreds of prisoners from dozens of species, all waiting to see what would happen next. She made her choice. "The problem is that you think we're your property. You think we'll keep working while you murder children in front of us. You think we'll stay quiet and obedient while you process anyone who doesn't meet your quotas." She took a step closer to the administrator. "You're wrong." The administrator gestured to the guards stationed around the assembly area. They raised their paralysis weapons, but Elena was already moving. 3 months of watching guard patterns and studying their equipment had taught her exactly how long it took a Zephyrian to aim and fire. It was too long. Elena hit the nearest guard at full speed, sending him crashing into the wall. His weapon flew across the floor and landed in the hands of Marcus Torres, who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The assembly area exploded into chaos. Months of careful planning and hidden preparation paid off in the span of 30 seconds. Mining tools that had been modified in secret became weapons. Communication devices built from spare parts coordinated attacks on guard positions throughout the colony. Tunnel systems that had been reinforced and expanded became escape routes and defensive positions. The Empire had given them access to industrial equipment and assumed they would only use it for mining. They were about to learn why that assumption was a fatal mistake. Marcus had turned the main power distribution center into a weapons factory. Mining lasers became artillery pieces. Atmospheric processors became chemical weapon generators. Ore refiners became explosive device manufacturing plants. The 6-legged ice creatures had been digging, not just the mining tunnels the Empire knew about, but a secondary network that connected every major system in the colony. Within minutes of the fighting starting, teams of prisoners were emerging from hidden passages throughout the complex. Dr. Kim had been teaching, not just human techniques, but human philosophy. The idea that intelligent beings had rights. The concept that freedom was worth fighting for. The radical notion that sometimes the only way to deal with bullies was to hit them back harder than they expected. The reptilian warriors had been planning. They knew how to turn an industrial facility into a fortress. They understood how to coordinate attacks across multiple fronts. They remembered what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. Administrator Curzon tried to reach his emergency communicator, but the device had been destroyed by an explosion that came from inside the colony's own power systems. He looked around the assembly area in confusion, trying to understand how a routine disciplinary action had turned into a full-scale rebellion. Elena walked over to where the 6 small creatures were still huddled together. They had stopped singing and were looking at the chaos around them with wide eyes. "You're safe now," she told them, though she knew they probably could not understand her words. One of the small creatures reached out and touched her hand. Through the contact, Elena felt something that might have been gratitude or hope or both. The colony's main communication array was in the deepest part of the asteroid, protected by multiple layers of security and thick metal walls. It had taken Marcus 3 months to figure out how to reach it without being detected. It took him 3 minutes to take control of it. Elena's voice echoed across the galaxy, transmitted on frequencies that reached every corner of the Empire. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the human exploration vessel Defiance. We are done being underestimated. We are done being treated like property. We are done watching you murder children." She paused, looking around at the prisoners who had joined the fight. Dozens of species working together for the first time in their lives, turning centuries of oppression into focused rage. "To the Empire, you have collected the most intelligent and capable species in the galaxy. You have given us access to your equipment and unlimited time to plan. You have pushed us past the point where we care more about our own safety than about doing what's right." The transmission was being received by thousands of worlds, millions of beings who had been told that resistance was hopeless and that the Empire was too strong to fight. "You made a mistake. You assumed that being technologically advanced meant being superior in every way that mattered. You forgot that sometimes the species that had to fight for everything they ever achieved are the most dangerous enemies of all." Elena looked directly into the communication device's recording lens. "We are humanity. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed us. We turned a world that was trying to kill us into a garden through sheer bloody-minded determination." Around her, the sound of fighting was dying down as the last of the colony's guards were overwhelmed. The Empire's mining facility had become something else entirely, a symbol that resistance was possible, a proof that the Empire could bleed. "And now," Elena said, "we're going to teach you what we learned a long time ago. That freedom isn't something you give to people who deserve it. It's something you take from people who think they can stop you." The transmission ended, but the message had already spread across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, in 1,000,000 different languages, the word was spreading. The humans were fighting back. And they were winning. The response came faster than Elena had expected. 3 days after their transmission, the first Empire fleet arrived at Tertius 7. 12 massive warships, each one large enough to carry 1,000 fighters. From the observation deck of the captured colony, Elena watched them take position around the asteroid. "Admiral Zeknoth demands your immediate surrender," came the message from the fleet. "Return to your assigned duties and only the leaders of this rebellion will be processed. Continue resistance and all prisoners will face immediate termination." Elena looked around at the beings standing with her. Marcus was there, along with Dr. Kim and the rest of her human crew. But there were also representatives from 15 other species. The 6-legged engineers, the musical creatures whose children had started this war, the reptilian tacticians, even some of the Vorthak workers who had originally been assigned to guard the prisoners. In 3 days, they had turned a mining colony into something the Empire had never seen before. A place where different species worked together as equals, where decisions were made by discussion instead of force, where everyone had a voice in determining their own fate. "Send a reply," Elena told the communications officer, one of the scaled mathematicians who had learned to operate human-modified equipment. "Tell Admiral Zeknoth that we'll consider his offer just as soon as he explains why the Empire has the right to own people." The reply came back within minutes. "You are not people. You are resources. The Empire has the right to manage its resources as it sees fit." Elena smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "That's what I thought they'd say." "Marcus, are the modifications ready?" Marcus Torres had been very busy since the rebellion started. The mining equipment that had been turned into weapons was just the beginning. Using techniques learned from a dozen different species and materials stolen from the Empire's own supply stores, he had been building things that should not have been possible with the available technology. "The asteroid's main engines are online," he said. "The Kethvar shield generators are integrated with our power systems. The Zilnoth particle cannons are locked onto their flagship." The Empire fleet opened fire first. Lance beams and plasma cannons designed to crack planets lit up space around Tertius 7. The beams hit the asteroid and simply disappeared, absorbed by shields based on technology from 12 different worlds. Admiral Zek Noth had expected to face a mining colony defended by primitive weapons and desperate prisoners. Instead, he found himself fighting a fortress that had been designed by the combined intelligence of the galaxy's most capable species. The return fire came from weapons that the Empire's computers could not identify. Particle beams that changed frequency mid-flight, making shields useless. Missiles that split into smaller missiles that split again into clouds of smart projectiles. Energy weapons that somehow delivered their power through hyperspace, bypassing conventional defenses entirely. Elena watched the first Empire ship explode and felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. Every being on that ship was someone's child, someone's friend, someone's hope for the future. But the Empire had made the choice to come here with weapons. They had decided that freedom was a crime punishable by death. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 8 of the Empire's warships were debris floating in space. The remaining 4 had retreated to a safe distance, broadcasting desperate requests for reinforcements. But something else was happening. Across the galaxy, other worlds were picking up the signals from the battle. They were watching an Empire fleet, supposedly invincible, being defeated by prisoners using mining equipment. On Korriban Prime, the ruling council met an emergency session for the first time in 50 years. They had been vassals of the Empire for centuries, paying tribute and providing resources in exchange for protection from raiders. But now they were seeing something they had thought impossible. The Empire could be beaten. On the frozen world of Thekma, the underground resistance movement that had been hiding in the ice caves for decades suddenly found new recruits. If humans could fight back, maybe they could too. In the outer spiral, 3 star systems that had been conquered only months earlier began coordinated attacks on Empire supply lines. They used tactics copied from the broadcasts coming from Tertius 7, turning their own industrial equipment into weapons and their knowledge of local space into strategic advantages. The Empire's response was swift and massive. Admiral Sekvoth the Destroyer arrived with a fleet of 300 ships and a reputation for ending rebellions permanently. He was known across the galaxy as the being who had crushed the Antaran uprising, the one who had turned the resistance of the outer worlds into a historical footnote written in blood. Elena received his message while standing in the modified command center that had once been the colony's administration office. Screens showed the positions of hundreds of enemy ships, but they also showed something else. Friendly contacts. Ships from a dozen different worlds all converging on Tertius 7. "I am Admiral Sekvoth," came the transmission. "I have ended more rebellions than your species has years of history. Surrender now and your death will be quick." Elena looked at the tactical display. 300 Empire ships, the most powerful fleet ever assembled for a single operation. Against them, maybe 50 vessels from various rebel worlds, most of them converted cargo ships and mining platforms. It should have been a massacre. "This is Elena Vasquez," she replied. "I have a message for you from humanity and our allies. We don't care how many rebellions you've ended. We don't care how powerful your fleet is. We don't care about your reputation or your threats." She paused, watching as more friendly contacts appeared on the screen. Ships were coming from everywhere, it seemed. Word was spreading faster than the Empire could respond. "What we care about is very simple. You have no right to own us. You have no right to decide our fate. You have no right to treat intelligent beings like property. And if you think you can make us accept those things through force, you're about to learn why that's not going to work." The battle that followed became legend. Elena had expected to fight a defensive action, using the asteroid's modified systems to hold off the Empire fleet long enough for their message to spread to more worlds. Instead, she found herself commanding a growing alliance of ships from dozens of different species, each one bringing their own knowledge and capabilities to the fight. The Ice World engineers had built ships that could hide in asteroid fields and emerge without warning. The mathematical species had created navigation computers that could calculate hyperspace jumps with incredible precision. The musical creatures had developed communication systems that could coordinate hundreds of ships across vast distances instantly. And the humans had contributed what they always contributed: the ability to look at any situation and figure out how to make it work for them. Admiral Sekvoth found himself fighting not just a rebellious mining colony, but a coordinated fleet that used tactics he had never seen before. Ships that worked together like schools of fish, breaking apart and reforming in patterns that made targeting impossible. Weapons that combined technologies from multiple species in ways that created entirely new capabilities. The Empire fleet was larger, better armed, and more experienced. But they were fighting according to rules and tactics that had worked for thousands of years against enemies who followed the same rules. Elena and her allies were writing new rules. When the battle ended, Admiral Sekvoth's flagship was drifting powerless in space, its crew evacuated to the remaining Empire ships. The destroyer had been destroyed by beings he had dismissed as primitives and rebels. But the real victory was not in the battle itself. It was in the thousands of worlds that had watched the broadcasts, that had seen the Empire's most feared admiral defeated by a coalition of species working together. The galaxy had learned that resistance was possible, that the Empire could be beaten. That freedom was worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. And they had learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were not the ones with the biggest ships or the most advanced weapons. Sometimes they were the ones who simply refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. Elena stood in the command center, watching the Empire's survivors retreat into hyperspace. Around her, beings from dozens of different worlds worked together to coordinate relief efforts, plan new operations, and welcome the stream of volunteers arriving from across the galaxy. The mining colony had become the capital of something that had never existed before, a truly free alliance of equals, united not by conquest or force, but by the simple idea that all intelligent beings deserved the right to choose their own destiny. The Empire was about to learn that some ideas once planted were impossible to destroy. The heart of the Zephyrian Empire was older than most civilizations. The capital world of Zephyra existed at the center of a system that had been engineered over thousands of years to be perfect. 3 suns provided constant light. Gravity generators ensured ideal conditions across the entire planet. The very space around the system had been modified to make it impossible for enemy fleets to approach undetected. It was here that the Eternal Council ruled from their crystal towers, beings of pure energy who had guided galactic civilization since before most species had discovered fire. They were ancient beyond measure, wise beyond question, and powerful beyond imagination. They had never expected to receive a surrender demand. Elena stood on the bridge of the modified asteroid that had become the flagship of the Galactic Liberation Fleet. 6 months had passed since the rebellion began at Tertius 7. In that time, the fleet had grown from 50 converted mining ships to over 3,000 vessels, representing more than 200 different species. They had come to Zephyra not as conquerors but as liberators. The difference was important to Elena, though she suspected the Empire would not see it that way. "Are you certain about this approach?" asked Kethra, the 6-legged engineer who had become Elena's closest advisor. "The Empire's defenses around their capital are beyond anything we have faced before." Elena looked at the tactical display showing the Zephyra system. Thousands of defense platforms, hundreds of the Empire's most powerful warships, energy barriers that could stop entire fleets, weapons that could crack moons. "We're not here to fight those defenses," she said. "We're here to make them irrelevant." The plan was ambitious even by human standards. Over the past months, the Liberation Fleet had been joined not just by rebels and escaped prisoners, but by something else entirely. Imperial citizens who had grown tired of living in a system based on oppression and fear. Dr. Kim had been working with defectors from across the Empire, learning about technologies and capabilities that the ruling class had kept hidden. She had discovered that the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. They had built a civilization so dependent on central control that disrupting the control systems would bring the entire structure crashing down. The Liberation Fleet's approach to Zephyra was unlike any military operation in galactic history. Instead of attacking the defenses directly, they simply ignored them. Ships scattered across the system, not to avoid the Empire's weapons, but to get close enough to broadcast on every frequency, every communication channel, every data network that connected the capital to the rest of the Empire. The message was simple. The war was over. The Empire had lost. Any Imperial forces that wished to join the new galactic coalition were welcome. Those who preferred to find peaceful jobs in a free galaxy would be helped to do so. Those who insisted on fighting to maintain a system based on slavery and oppression would be treated as the war criminals they were. But it was not Elena's voice that carried the message. It was the voices of beings from every world the Empire had conquered, speaking in thousands of different languages, sharing stories of what freedom meant to them. Admiral Kurthek, commander of the Imperial Home Fleet, tried to coordinate a defense. But as the broadcast spread through the system, something unprecedented happened. Imperial ships began to surrender. Not just a few isolated vessels, but entire battle groups. The crews had been listening to the broadcasts for months. They had heard about worlds where different species worked together as equals. They had learned about the idea that strength came from cooperation rather than domination. They had seen proof that there was an alternative to the Empire's way of doing things. The crystal towers where the Eternal Council resided were protected by barriers that could stop any physical attack. But they could not stop the broadcasts that were now reaching every corner of the capital system. For the first time in millennia, the rulers of the Empire found themselves listening to voices that disagreed with them. The Council's response came not as words, but as a presence that filled every mind in the system simultaneously. Elena felt it like pressure behind her eyes. A sense of vast intelligence focused on her with the intensity of a star. "We offer you recognition as a senior species," came the message. "You will be granted territory, resources, and authority over lesser civilizations. You will take your place in the natural order as rulers rather than ruled." Elena felt the temptation in those words. Humanity could join the Empire as equals rather than slaves. They could have worlds, fleets, power over others. All they had to do was accept that some species were meant to rule and others were meant to serve. "No," she said aloud, and her refusal echoed across every communication channel in the system. The presence pressed harder, and Elena could feel the Council's confusion. They had offered humanity everything they thought any species could want: power, territory, dominance over others. It was the greatest honor the Empire could bestow. "Explain your refusal," came the demand. Elena looked around the bridge at the beings who had chosen to stand with humanity. Kethra and her six-legged people, Zilmoth from the musical species, Vortank from the warrior race, representatives from dozens of different worlds all working together because they shared the same simple belief. "We don't want your hierarchy," Elena said. "We want your surrender." The words hit the Eternal Council like a physical blow. In thousands of years of rule, no one had ever rejected their ultimate offer. No species had ever looked at the chance to join the ruling class and chosen to tear down the system instead. "You cannot comprehend the chaos that will result from destroying the established order," the Council responded. "Without structure, without guidance, the galaxy will collapse into violence and barbarism." Elena smiled. It was the same smile she had worn in the prison cell all those months ago, when she had first realized that the Empire had no idea what they were dealing with. "The galaxy has been in a state of violence and barbarism for thousands of years," she said. "The only difference is that you've been the ones controlling it. You've convinced yourselves that oppression is order, that slavery is structure, that fear is guidance." She gestured to the display showing the Zephyr system. Imperial ships were joining the Liberation fleet by the hundreds. Defense platforms were powering down as their crews chose freedom over duty. The Empire's perfect capital system was coming apart not through conquest, but through choice. "You're about to learn what real order looks like. What happens when beings work together because they want to, not because they're forced to. What strength actually means when it comes from protecting the weak instead of exploiting them." The final battle was not a battle at all. It was a conversation that lasted 3 days, broadcast live across the galaxy, as the Eternal Council tried to convince the assembled species that hierarchy and domination were natural laws that could not be broken. Elena and her allies responded not with weapons, but with examples. They showed what had been accomplished when different species shared their knowledge freely. They demonstrated technologies that had been developed through cooperation instead of conquest. They proved that diversity was not a weakness to be controlled, but a strength to be celebrated. On the third day, something unprecedented happened. The barriers around the crystal towers came down, and the Eternal Council emerged for the first time in millennia. They were not the gods they had pretended to be, but ancient beings who had become so convinced of their own superiority that they had forgotten what it meant to be part of a community. The Empire officially surrendered not with a treaty, but with an apology. A recognition that they had been wrong, that their way of organizing civilization had caused immeasurable suffering, and that it was time for something better. Elena stood in the same crystal chamber where the Empire had once ruled the galaxy. But now it looked different. Representatives from every world sat in a great circle, discussing how to build a civilization based on cooperation instead of domination. There were arguments, disagreements, and heated debates. But there was also something that had never existed in the Empire's sterile hierarchy. There was hope. The galactic coalition that emerged from the ashes of the Empire was messy, chaotic, and complicated. Decisions took longer to make when everyone had a voice. Conflicts arose when different species had different ideas about how things should be done. Progress was slower when it had to account for the needs and desires of hundreds of different civilizations. It was also the most prosperous, creative, and peaceful period in galactic history. Elena eventually returned to Earth, but not as the same person who had left on an exploration mission years earlier. She had become something that her world had never produced before, a human who had helped reshape the galaxy. The stories of humanity's role in overthrowing the Empire became legends told on 1,000 worlds. But the real legacy was not in the stories. It was in the simple idea that had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. That any species arrogant enough to believe they had the right to rule others would eventually meet beings who simply refused to kneel. The cosmos had faced the wrath of a species that had learned to turn their anger into justice, their desperation into determination, and their